Okay, welcome to Monsterology. Today we've got something very special. As you know, we basically look into the deep reservoir of culture, folklore, monster stories, the Bible, whatever it is, epic poems, and we generate ideas, creative ideas, and we develop those ideas. And in this case, we're going to be looking at the tip of a huge iceberg, and that iceberg is the Chinese epic story called Journey to the West. In Chinese, this is Shi You Ji. And everyone in Asia knows this story in the same way that Westerners tend to know something like the Odyssey or the Iliad. Most Westerners know something about Homer, or maybe the better analogy here would be the Bible, where anyone from the Judeo-Christian and even Muslim traditions has the Bible in their background as sort of their cultural oxygen, as it were. And so too, the Chinese story Shi You Ji, probably composed around the 16th century, but certainly existing in oral forms long before that, is very well known in the East. There are many cartoons, there are plays, there are musicals, there are operas. It's part of the educational system. There's iconography everywhere, pictorial traditions. It's really wonderful, deep culture stuff. What we're looking at is just a tiny tip of this iceberg, which is a monster character named the Red Boy. And he is quite an interesting character. He blasts fire out of his eyes and out of his mouth. He's a sort of a tantrum child. And the great hero of Journey to the West is a monkey king named Sun Wukong. And Sun Wukong has to fight the Red Boy. And so we're gonna sort of explore this story, and we're gonna do a whole series of images based on it, and I'm gonna try to give you sort of an entry into this giant iceberg that I'm calling a large part of Chinese and Asian culture. One thing to notice about Journey to the West and Asian monsters generally, this is true not just of Asian monsters, but you'll find this oftentimes in African culture too. It's not a simple dichotomy or dualism of all good and all bad characters fighting each other. That happens sometimes, but mostly in the East, what you'll find is that the evildoer is also somehow likable, and also the really good characters, the heroes, are also very flawed, and they do all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't consider heroic. And that's perhaps part of the larger Chinese yin-yang system, which comes out of a tradition of Taoism, where you've seen this shape many times of a circle with a teardrop, nested against another teardrop. And the idea here is that everything is made of opposites that are interpenetrating each other, and that what we're looking for is a kind of balance or harmony of these systems. And this is a little bit different from the sort of Western idea that there's a perfect, all good thing, namely God, and the heroes fight on the side of God, and then there's a perfect evil over here. In the East, it's much more fluid. There's a wonderful story, in fact, that the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh once said. He said, if you think about it, human beings, they love flowers, but they hate garbage. But if you think about it from a sort of cosmic perspective, all flowers are on their way to becoming garbage, and all garbage is on its way to becoming flowers. And so this is a classic sort of Eastern way of thinking about these cycles of good and bad. All right, so without further ado, the Red Boy.
All right, the first thing I thought I should do is draw one of these classic Fu dogs, or really more accurately, the Fu lions. In Chinese, this is called the Shizi. And you've seen these before. They're very common, outside imperial palaces, tombs, temples, that kind of thing. And they're really Buddhist guardian lions. They're protectors of the Dharma. They're very common in Chinese Buddhism. They protect from threats like bad spirits or bad people. And Fu, they're really not dogs, they're lions, but Fu is some kind of corruption of the word Fo. Fo Jiao is the word for Buddhism. So there seems to be just some bad transliteration there of Fo Jiao, which is Buddhist lions. This kind of imagery has spread to Singapore, Laos, Taiwan. You see them in Cambodia. They're in every Chinatown, in every city. So they're very common, and I thought I should start with this as a sort of protector spirit as we get into some of the ideas here of Buddhism. Okay, what you're looking at here is an image of the actual expedition. This is the journey to the west. In the front you have the Monkey King, and behind him on the horse you have the Tang monk called Xuan Zang. He turns out to be sort of very important in the story because he's going all the way from China to India to get Buddhist scriptures, and he's followed by two other helpers, Zhu Bajie and Xiao Jing. This is my drawing here of the Tang monk. His real name is Xuan Zang. Here he's praying a mantra on some beads, and you're going to hear why that's important later on in this discussion. He was a real guy. He was a Buddhist monk scholar living in the 7th century. His actual dates are from 602 to 664 of the Common Era. And he really did travel to India during the early Tang dynasty. And his journey took him through Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh. It was like a 17-year journey. So what I'm doing at the pencil drawing here is, once I've got the sketch down, I thought I'd bring in this blending stump, and this really helps to smooth the rough lines and really gets kind of a wonderful even tone to the shading. And it took me a while to get the drawing just right on this, but then going in just with a little bit of this blending stump really gives, I think, a good texture and a good almost like sculpted three-dimensional look to the forms. So I recommend trying this. If you do a lot of sketching, get one of these blending stumps, add that to your arsenal, and try to bring it in every now and then, just to sort of smooth things out. I thought, since it's sort of a sculpture, it would be kind of a nice touch to give it some of these smoother qualities. Anyway, back to the story. Xuan Zang, the Tang monk, was actually, his adventures were sort of recorded in what was called the Great Tang Records of the Western Regions. And these served as the source materials for what came to be Journey to the West. Journey to the West is this, giant, epic set of books, supposedly written by Wu Cheng'an during the Ming Dynasty. So this is like 900 years after the actual life of Xuan Zang the monk. You get the sort of fictionalized version of his story. And in the fictionalized version, Journey to the West, the Buddha himself tells the monk that he should go to India and get the good Dharma scriptures. And so that's how the story of Journey to the West begins. And what I'm doing now, I'm sort of adding some water to this mixed media paper. I've got this wonderful sketchbook which is designed for mixed media. And I thought, since I'm going to be doing some drawings in ink, I wanted to try this technique. I know you've seen something like this in a lot of Chinese and Japanese art, where you add water, it's wet on wet, then you add the ink, and then you use the gravity to pull the ink around on the page. And I think you can see here the effect is absolutely stunning. There's just no way to paint this with your hand. You really just have to use this kind of indirect method. And it's very organic, it's very, very beautiful. It has all of the kind of qualities that you find in Buddhist philosophy, which is, and Taoism really, which is sort of try to be in harmony with nature, follow the way of the water. And so here what I've done is I've used ink in the sumi brush technique that I was just showing you, and I've done a drawing of Sun Wukong. Now, Sun Wukong is the Monkey King, and here he's carrying his giant cudgel, which is this bat which he uses, and he's basically a superhero. And he's developed in the story of Journey to the West because he's the main protector of the monk. So our monk, Xuan Zang, is told by the Buddha to go to get Buddhist scriptures from India, and the Buddha says, I'm going to give you these three helpers, one of which is Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. And the Monkey King turns out to be the star of the show. He's battling constantly with enemies. He's got all these great powers. And so in Asian culture, there's a huge sort of cultural reference to Sun Wukong, or the Monkey King. Here I decided to draw him as a sort of Peking opera star. He figures in a lot of Peking opera, and so I found a picture of this is a man dressed as Sun Wukong doing a sort of operatic representation of Journey to the West. And I just love the kind of makeup that they use on the face. They always use red and black to characterize the face and redo the face. And so here I did a pencil drawing, and then I thought I would use watercolors and sort of watered down acrylics to try to bring some of the colors to life. And it's a technique I've used before, but I was pretty nervous here because you can see how complex this drawing is, and frankly you can see how small it is. I realized as I started to apply the paint that I had done this thing too small, and it was forcing me to do a lot of painting at the very tip of that brush, which thank God comes to a nice fine point. But sometimes you start something and the constraints actually give you new possibilities. So I'm fairly happy with how this is going. I'm adding now with a brush quill pen some additional sort of nuances and some of the black lines of the face. So here's the final image. I was able to get some of that watercolor stuff in the background and also some refined shapes in the foreground of the face. Then I thought I should introduce my main character, which is the Red Boy himself. Now, Sun Wukong, the Monkey King on the right here that I'm drawing, is a fairly difficult character. As I said in the beginning, he's mischievous, he's arrogant, he's selfish, he's childish, he's rebellious, and in a way the monk has to control him by that little headband that you see around his head. He tricked Sun Wukong into wearing this headband, and now the Monkey King, Sun Wukong, can't take it off. So when he's being particularly naughty and mischievous, the Buddhist monk, Xuan Zang, can recite that mantra with his prayer beads, and that headband squeezes around Sun Wukong's head and makes him do whatever the monk tells him to do. So it's a form of discipline, and this is sort of a Buddhist metaphor for how you have to control yourself, your craving, your distractions, your ego. The goal in Buddhism is to sort of reduce this monkey mind, and Journey to the West sort of captures it in a way with this metaphor of a character that it represents the monkey mind. Here I'm drawing the Red Boy here on the left, and the Red Boy is someone that stops Sun Wukong and Xuan Zang from passing through on their way to India. So Sun Wukong has to fight him. The Red Boy, his Chinese name is Hong Hai Ar. He's the protector of the fiery mountains, and he's the son of Princess Iron Fan and Bull Demon King. And I thought I would do him here with a kind of red acrylic, and I'm adding some black line work, but you're going to see I'm going to roll over it with a roller and some acrylic paint to obscure it and make it look more ancient. That's what I'm doing here. And then I'm going to draw back into that image to try to bring out yeah, here you go. You see what I'm doing here. That really antiques the image beautifully. I stamped it with a kind of fake Chinese stamp that I made out of rubber, and I basically antiqued it or put this patina on it. And then the last thing is I added those fiery eyes. And that's flame shooting out of the Red Boy's eyes. That's his superpower. And I had to do that in a digital, in basically an iPad digital program. That's the only way to get the colors so vibrant. So I scanned in the drawing and then added that through the digital program. Procreate is what I used on an iPad. So now what happens then is that they fight, and since the Red Boy can spray fire out of his eyes and out of his mouth, he basically starts winning. Sun Wukong can't beat him. He tries to get rain from the Eastern Dragon King, but the rain does no good. So finally Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, asks for help from higher ups, from some real Buddhist high-powered forces, namely the Bodhisattva Guan Yin. And you've probably seen Guan Yin before. I did a whole sort of discussion of her in another episode where she helps the hungry ghosts. She's basically a kind of female incarnation of the Buddha. The Bodhisattva is very famous in China and all over Asia. She's usually very beautiful, dressed in white robes, standing on a lotus. And what happens is the red boy gets into her forest lair and finds her lotus throne. And then he sits on it because he's so arrogant and has such audacity that he pretends he's Guan Yin. And at that moment that he's sort of pretending he's Guan Yin, swords and daggers shoot up from the lotus throne and stab into him. Now I know this is kind of a gruesome story, but this is really part of the journey to the West. So I thought I would represent that here. And you see I'm using that technique I was just using before too, where I roll the ink over and then I pull out some of the details. So what happens then is Guan Yin, he begs for mercy. Guan Yin basically rescues him. And then Red Boy is so naughty and so evil that he attacks Guan Yin directly. Then she creates a series of these tightening disciplinary collars like the one that Sun Wukong has around his head. And whenever she says her mantra, which is Om Mani Padme Hum, they tighten around him. And she basically recites this until these discipline collars tighten around him, and finally he submits. So I thought the last drawing I would do would be sort of a drawing of the red boy after he's finally submitted. So he's pledging his allegiance to Guan Yin and to Buddhism, and I'm drawing this tight collar around his head like the one that Sun Wukong has. And this basically allows him to cool down, and this is what allows him to pledge his allegiance to Buddhism and become, ironically, a more free person, because the paradox in Buddhism is that you only become free by disciplining yourself more firmly. So this whole story is a wonderful pictorial story, but it's also a metaphor for how you overcome your own ego and your own cravings. And the only way to become free of your inner slavery is to submit yourself to the discipline of meditation, and in particular mindful meditation. It's interesting that the fire that shoots out of his eyes is called samadhi fire, and samadhi is an ancient Sanskrit word which means concentration. But the Buddha thought that that kind of concentration, which was already known among the Hindu yogis of his day, was not good enough, and he replaced it with another form of meditation which we call mindfulness. And that's the Pali word for mindfulness is sati. So in a way, this story is kind of an allegory for how you should, even if you have great concentration powers, you still need to bring your mind into the present moment in this simple way that the Buddha teaches, and that will help calm you down and cool you off. So for those reasons, I chose to sort of do some of this drawing in blue. You see I used blue Prismacolor pencils to sort of represent the red boy cooling off. I still wanted to bring in the reds of his natural, constitution, but I wanted to show that he was, through meditation and dedication to Buddhism, he was kind of cooling down. And in fact, it's interesting that the Buddhist word nirvana, or in Pali, nibbana, is really just translates as cooling off. So there's a lot of allegorical stuff going on here. I love it because the imagery is so rich, but I think you can see that I was able to use color and different kind of stylizations and different kinds of symbols to sort of characterize the deeper philosophical ideas involved here. And I'm hoping that this gives you a sense of the way in which Buddhism is actually baked in to the mythological culture that's common in East Asia. So you might see cartoons about Red Boy and Sun Wukong, but in those sort of kung fu fights is actually a lot of Buddhist philosophy. So here's the final drawing of a cooled down Red Boy finally calming down enough to not shoot fire out of his eyes. And that concludes this episode, but if you like this kind of thing, please hit the subscribe button and come back for more, and thanks for watching. All right, take care.